The dust had not yet settled when the first scream tightened the air. It cut through the valley like a ruptured thread, sharp, uncontrolled, and unmistakably laced with fear. Far below the ridge where the convoy had stalled, rangers were scrambling for cover behind fractured rocks that offered almost no protection. Bullets carved thin streaks through the sunlight, shredding the quiet afternoon into something chaotic and cruel. Mira didn't belong there. At least that was what every soldier had told her that morning. She was just a war reporter, camera slung across her chest, boots too new, vest marked press. Like it could stop anything truly determined to kill her. She had promised she wouldn't step away from them, wouldn't interfere, wouldn't try to be part of something she wasn't trained for. Yet now, as the ambush erupted from hidden ledges and crevices, promises no longer mattered. Chaos demanded choices, and some choices didn't wait for permission. A ranger fell near her, blood splattering across her notebook. The sight locked her breath in place. He clutched his shoulder, sliding behind a tire blown apart by shrapnel. She crouched beside him, her pulse banging against her ribs, tasting metal in the back of her throat. The world around her compressed into violent fragments, dirt exploding upward, rifles snapping, the bitter smell of cordite drifting through the valley. She scanned the ridgeline. Shadows moved with lethal precision, silhouettes merging with jagged stone. She counted 6, then 8, no more. Their angles were perfect. Their positions were fatal, and the rangers, pinned from 2 sides, had seconds before the attackers tightened the noose completely. She felt something shift in her chest, not courage, not defiance, but a quiet, steady certainty, the kind a person feels when a truth long buried finally rises. Most people didn't know she once held a different life. Not glamorous, not decorated, but disciplined, accurate, quiet. Before she ever told stories with words, she had learned to steady her hands, breathe through adrenaline, and measure distance with instinct sharper than math. She saw a fallen rifle inches from her boot. No one noticed it in the chaos. No one expected her to see the small details the way soldiers do. But she did. A ranger beside her swore under his breath as his ammo ran dry. His eyes flicked to her, not in expectation, but in apology. He thought she would die because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Mira knew better. She grabbed the rifle. The metal was hot, trembling with residual recoil. Her palms stung, but her heartbeat slowed unnaturally slow, unnervingly calm. The valley noise dimmed, shrinking beneath the weight of focus, tightening around her like a second skin. She shifted behind the shredded tire, propping the rifle against her shoulder. Her cheek pressed against the stock, familiar in a way that terrified her. She hadn't touched a weapon in years, yet her muscles remembered, her mind remembered. She inhaled once, deep enough that the dust singed her lungs. There, a movement, a flash of cloth behind a boulder, a barrel lifting. She didn't think. Thinking wasted time. She fired. The shot cut through the air with surgical finality. A body dropped. The rangers froze, stunned not because an enemy fell, but because the person who had taken the shot wasn't one of them. It was the reporter they'd told to stay out of the way. She shifted to her next target without hesitation. One shot, a third, a fourth. Each found its mark with frightening precision. 11 attackers had taken positions around the valley. By the time her rifle clicked empty, 11 lay still. And only then did the rangers realize the ambush had ended in a silence so thick it felt like held breath. Mira lowered the weapon slowly. Dust drifted around her in soft spirals. The soldier beside her stared at her as if she had become someone he had never seen before. Someone impossible. She didn't look victorious. She didn't look proud. She looked haunted by her own accuracy. As the valley quieted, every ranger understood one truth. She wasn't just a war reporter. She had been hiding something carved deep into her bones, something she had hoped she'd never need again. The stillness that followed felt unnatural, like the valley itself was trying to understand What had just happened? The silence didn't soothe Mira. It pressed against her skin like a weight she couldn't shrug off. Dust hovered in the sunlight, tiny golden flecks dancing in the warm air, while the metallic scent of spent rounds clung stubbornly to the back of her throat. The Rangers began to rise from their cover slowly, blinking as if waking from a collective daze. Some checked their limbs, unsure whether they'd survived by skill, luck, or miracle. A few stared at Mira longer than they meant to. Their expressions tugged between gratitude and confusion. They saw her as the woman who had stepped into a battlefield with nothing but a camera. Now they saw a contradiction, a reporter with the hands of a marksman, and the eyes of someone who had been here before. Captain Rourke approached her first. His boots crunched softly against broken gravel. He looked at her clothes, still marked press, and then at the bodies on the ridge, each perfectly felled. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth lingered in the air thick with unasked questions. Mira didn't meet anyone's gaze. She knelt beside the wounded ranger whose blood had stained her notebook. She steadied his breathing, pressing fabric against the wound. He winced but managed a shaky smile. She gave him a slow nod, the kind someone gives when they're holding back 1,000 explanations and choosing none. Her hands didn't shake. That was what unsettled her most. She had hoped the years away from weapons would dull her precision, rust her instincts, make her incapable of slipping back into the person she once was. The fact that it all returned so effortlessly felt like a betrayal of her own oath, of the life she promised she would never return to. Rourke crouched beside her. His voice was low, almost careful. Those shots, no ranger here could have made them under pressure. Where did you learn that? Mira pressed the cloth firmer into the ranger's wound. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched a small stream of dust drift down the ridge, like a sigh released by the mountains. She had spent years building a life where her weapons were words, her battlegrounds were stories, and the only thing she aimed for was the truth. Yet truth had a brutal way of dragging her back to places she avoided even in nightmares. She finally whispered, a long time ago. It wasn't enough, but it was all she was willing to say. The Rangers exchanged glances. Some looked impressed, others looked uneasy. She could feel their questions pressing in from all directions, tugging at her past like fingers pulling threads loose. But they were given no time to ask more. A tremor rolled across the valley floor, a low vibration, subtle but unmistakable. Rourke shot a glance toward the eastern ridge. Secondary team, he muttered, they're regrouping. Mira stiffened. She knew the pattern. Ambushes like this rarely came alone. The first wave pinned the target. The second wave crushed whatever remained. And from the look in Rourke's eyes, he understood it too. The Rangers began reloading, repositioning. Their breaths grew measured, prepared. Mira stepped back, intending to retreat behind the armored vehicle where she belonged. But then she caught sight of the same wounded ranger she had helped, his face pale, but watching her with a fragile hope. He thought she could protect them again. He thought she could do what he could not, and that expectation frightened her more than the ambush itself. She gripped the strap of her camera, torn between who she was and who she used to be. She didn't want to become their shield. She didn't want her past to define this moment. But fate has a way of cornering people with choices that are never fair. As the faint echo of approaching footsteps drifted down the ridge, Mira realized this valley wasn't finished with her yet. Some truths demand to be confronted, some pasts refuse to stay buried, and some people, no matter how much they run, are drawn back to the fight by a pull they wish they could sever. The second wave was coming, and Mira knew, with chilling certainty, that her story was no longer the one she came here to write. It was the one she had spent her whole life trying not to tell. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint tremor, a rhythm too organized to be mistaken for nature. Mira's chest tightened as she listened. She recognized the cadence instantly, boots moving in coordinated intervals. Calculated, disciplined, confident. Whoever was coming wasn't scrambling like desperate fighters. They were advancing with intent. The Rangers closed ranks, instinctively forming a loose perimeter around the wounded. Rourke gave silent gestures, subtle yet sharp, assigning cover points and fallback angles. Despite the rising tension, the valley felt strange, almost suspended. The sunlight glowed warmly on the rocks, as if completely unaware of the violence preparing to unfold beneath it. Mira stood just outside their formation. She could feel their uncertainty around her, a quiet question that lingered in the space between breaths. Was she meant to stand back? Was she supposed to help? Was she even safe? She didn't know. Her heartbeat thudded against her ribs, not in fear, but in a familiar, unwanted rhythm. The part of her she had buried kept tightening inside her, stretching its limbs, waking, demanding. She didn't want it. She didn't want the world to see that version of her again. But the footsteps grew louder, scattering pebbles down the slope. Rourke's jaw tightened. Positions, he whispered, eyes fixed toward the upper ledge where shadows slid between rocks. Mira took one step back, then another. She touched the camera at her chest, as if reminding herself why she was here. Its edges were warm, its weight comforting. It symbolized a life she had carved out of ruin, a life built on telling stories instead of surviving them. She focused on that thought, on the reasons she left her past behind, on the oath she made never again. But then she saw the younger ranger, barely 20, face pale beneath streaks of dust, as he tried to lift his rifle with trembling arms. His hands were shaking too hard, his breathing too fast. He pressed his back against a rock, eyes wide with the kind of fear that cuts through bravado and leaves a person exposed. She felt a twist inside her, a memory, unwelcome, sharp, flashed behind her eyes. She had seen that look before, years ago, in another place, in another ambush. She remembered what it felt like to watch someone freeze, what it felt like when no one stepped in time. Her breath caught, something inside her gave way, a figure appeared on the ridge, then another, dark shapes merging with the sunlight, rifles angled downward. Their positioning was precise, their descent was slow, deliberate, confident. They believed the Rangers were weakened. They believed the second strike would be easy. They had no idea who was standing among them. Rourke whispered, "Wait for my mark." But Mira didn't hear him. Or maybe she did, but something deeper, older, drowned it out. A silence spread within her. Not the silence of fear, but the kind that comes when the mind locks onto survival with absolute clarity. Her eyes scanned the ridge. She saw lines, angles, paths. She measured distance by instinct. She watched where the sun hit the rocks, how shadows shifted around the attackers' bodies. Every breath they took revealed their timing. Every step they made exposed a weakness. She didn't have a rifle this time. She didn't have the comfort of steady metal against her shoulder. But nearby lay another weapon, a ranger's dropped marksman rifle, abandoned when he'd been dragged to safety. It rested half, buried in dust, as if waiting for someone whose hands knew what to do. Mira stared at it. Her pulse steadied, her breath evened, her hands stopped trembling altogether. She didn't want to pick it up. She didn't want to step into the role fate kept forcing upon her. But as the first shot cracked from the ridge, directed at the injured ranger she'd tried to save, she moved. Instinct overrode every promise she had ever made. Her hand closed around the cold metal. The rifle lifted with a familiarity that cut through her chest like a blade. Rourke turned sharply toward her, but before he could protest, Mira dropped to one knee, braced the weapon, and let her focus narrow into a perfect, unforgiving line. She breathed in, breathed out, then fired. The second ambush hadn't even fully descended, and already the balance of the fight had shifted. The past she'd run from was now leading her aim, and the valley braced for what her resurrection would bring next. The rifle's recoil slid through her shoulder like a memory sharp, grounding, undeniable. The first enemy dropped before the Rangers even realized she'd fired. The second stumbled, collapsing against a jagged outcrop as her next shot split the sunlight with cold precision. The valley shifted, the balance of fear changed direction. The attackers hesitated, their coordinated descent breaking apart as they scanned the field in confusion. They had expected wounded soldiers, desperate defenses, a collapsing line. They had not expected her. Mira moved before hesitation could reach her muscles. She adjusted her posture, anchoring herself with a steadiness that only came from years buried deep beneath the surface. Every movement was efficient, quiet, controlled, a choreography she had once sworn to forget. Rourke watched her from the corner of his eye, stunned but not interrupting. He understood that something was unfolding here that he did not yet know how to name. Her hands did not belong to a reporter. Her focus did not belong to a civilian, and her aim belonged to a ghost from a world far more precise and unforgiving than theirs. A shadow shifted atop the ridge, an enemy sniper angling for a position that would have ended the Rangers' last line of defense. Mira's breath steadied, the air thinned, the valley around her blurred at the edges. She aligned her shot not to hit where he stood, but where he would be half a heartbeat later. She fired, the bullet met him mid-motion. He crumpled, falling backward out of sight. The younger Ranger near her exhaled shakily, as though he had been holding his breath for the last minute. He looked at her not with shock, but with the raw, stunned gratitude of someone who had glimpsed death, and then watched her push it away with quiet certainty. The remaining attackers wavered. Mira felt the shift in their rhythm, their confidence fractured, their angles faltered. Predators transformed into prey within moments, and they knew it. One tried to retreat toward the upper slope. Mira slid her grip, adjusting without thought. She fired once. He folded into the dust. Another sprinted sideways, ducking behind a rock. She tracked the movement with calm inevitability, waiting for the slightest reveal of his shoulder, his elbow, the tilt of his weapon. It came, she fired, he fell, and then the valley grew quiet again, not the shock-laden silence from the first wave. This silence was steadier, heavier, filled with the breath of those who realized they had just survived something they shouldn't have. Mira slowly lowered the rifle. Her fingers remained curled around it a moment too long, as though she needed to remember what it felt like before she let it go again. Then she placed it gently on the ground, the way someone sets down a memory they aren't ready to face. The Rangers emerged from cover, their faces dusted with disbelief. Some stared at the ridge, stunned by the perfect pattern of fallen bodies. Others stared at her, unsure whether they had just witnessed a miracle or a revelation meant to stay buried. Rourke approached her last. His shadow fell across the rifle at her feet. His voice was low, not demanding, not confrontational, just human. "You've done this before." Mira didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sunlight painted gold across distant mountains. She felt the old ache inside her, the one she tried to drown beneath years of reporting, writing, documenting instead of doing. "I walked away from that life," she murmured. "I promised myself I would never pick up anything like that again." Rourke considered her for a long, quiet moment. "And yet you saved every man here today." She didn't smile. The cost in her eyes was too evident for celebration. "Words were supposed to be my weapon now. Maybe they still are," Rourke replied gently, "but sometimes the world doesn't give you the luxury of choosing only one side of yourself." She felt those words sink into her, unsettling something she had tried so hard to stabilize. She wasn't proud of what she'd done, but neither was she ashamed. That was the part that scared her most. The wounded Ranger she had helped earlier raised a hand weakly from where he lay bandaged. "Ma'am, you didn't just save us, you gave us a chance we didn't have." His voice cracked with sincerity. "Don't regret that." The wind brushed through the valley again, softer now, carrying with it a warmth that hadn't been present before. The sunlight settled on her shoulders like a silent acknowledgment. The mountains stood tall, unchanging witnesses to the truth she could no longer run from. She wasn't just a reporter. She wasn't just a former sharpshooter. She was both. She was more. And maybe, in this world bruised by conflict and truth alike, someone who carried both stories and precision might be exactly what was needed. Rook stepped back, giving her space. The other rangers followed suit, not out of distance but out of respect. A different kind of silence filled the valley now, shaped by gratitude rather than shock. Mira took one long breath, feeling the dust settle inside her chest like the last line of a chapter she hadn't planned to write. She picked up her camera again, not to hide behind it, but because she finally understood something she hadn't before. Her lens could tell the story. Her aim had ensured she lived to tell it, and the world would never see her the same way again. Not after the valley, not after the 11 perfect shots, not after she became the hero she never wanted to be, but refused to let others die without becoming.